The radio crackled with desperation. Viper 1-7, we need immediate air support. We're pinned down and taking heavy casualties. Staff Sergeant Martinez's voice cut through the static as his squad hugged the rocky terrain of the Afghan mountainside. Above them, 10 enemy MiG-29 fighters circled like vultures, their engines screaming death from above. What the enemy didn't know was that Captain Cassandra "Ghost" Reynolds was already there, invisible in her B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, watching from the shadows at 40,000 feet. In the next 60 seconds, she would turn the tide of battle. In the most spectacular aerial engagement the military had ever witnessed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Captain Cassandra Reynolds had always been different. While other kids played with dolls, she built model airplanes. While her classmates dreamed of becoming teachers or doctors, she stared at the sky and imagined herself soaring through clouds. In million-dollar aircraft. Now at 28, she was living that dream in the cockpit of the most advanced stealth bomber ever created. The morning of September 15th started like any other at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. Cassandra arrived at 0500 hours, her flight suit pressed to perfection, her auburn hair pulled back in regulation style. She had that quiet confidence that came from being one of only 37 pilots qualified to fly the B-2 Spirit. The other pilots called her Ghost, partly for her ability to appear and disappear without a trace in the stealth bomber, and partly for her eerily calm demeanor under pressure. "Morning briefing at 15, Ghost," called out Major Thompson as she walked past the operations center. Cassandra nodded, grabbing her coffee, black, no sugar, just like her father taught her before he died in Desert Storm. She had been 12. Then, watching the news coverage with tears streaming down her face, promising herself she would finish what he started. The briefing room buzzed with the usual pre-mission energy. Intelligence Officer Captain Williams stood at the front, pointing to satellite images of the Kandahar province. "Operation Silent Thunder is a routine reconnaissance mission," he explained, his laser pointer dancing across the mountainous terrain. "Single B-2, 8-hour flight path, standard intelligence gathering over suspected Taliban strongholds." Cassandra studied the maps intently. Something felt off about this mission. The flight path seemed unnecessarily complex, taking her deep into hostile territory where enemy air defenses were known to be active. She had flown 43 combat missions over the past 2 years, and her instincts had kept her alive through every one of them. "Expected enemy air activity?" she asked, raising her hand. "Minimal," Williams replied. "Our latest intelligence suggests most of their aircraft are grounded for maintenance." Cassandra made a mental note to verify that intelligence herself. She had learned early in her career that minimal could quickly become overwhelming in the mountains of Afghanistan. After the briefing, she walked across the tarmac to where her B-2 sat in its climate-controlled hangar. The aircraft was a marvel of engineering, a flying wing design that looked more like something from a science fiction movie than a military bomber. Its radar-absorbent coating made it nearly invisible to enemy detection systems, and its advanced avionics suite gave her capabilities that previous generations of pilots could only dream of. Chief Master Sergeant Davis, her crew chief, met her at the aircraft. "She's ready to go, Captain," he said, patting the bomber's wing affectionately. "All systems green, full fuel load, and I've loaded the standard reconnaissance package." "Any word on those weather patterns over the Hindu Kush?" Cassandra asked, running her pre-flight checklist. "Clear skies, light winds. Perfect flying weather," Davis replied. "Though I did notice some unusual radio chatter on the intelligence frequencies this morning." Cassandra paused her checklist. "What kind of chatter?" "Nothing specific, just more traffic than usual." "Could be nothing, but ... double quotes Davis had been maintaining aircraft for 22 years. When he said something felt off, smart pilots listened. "I'll keep my ears open," she said, climbing into the cockpit. The B-2's cockpit was like stepping into the future. Multiple LCD displays showed everything from engine parameters to threat detection systems. Cassandra settled into her seat, the familiar ritual of strapping in and connecting her oxygen system as automatic as breathing. This was her domain, her sanctuary 40,000 feet above the chaos of the world below. Engine start procedures began at 0730 hours. The 4 General Electric turbofans spooled up with a low whistle that gradually built to a powerful rumble. Cassandra ran through her systems checks methodically. Flight controls, navigation, communications, defensive systems. Everything was perfect, just as it always was. "Whiteman Tower, Spirit 2-1 requesting taxi clearance," she called over the radio. "Spirit 2-1, cleared to taxi runway 27, winds light and variable." As she taxied toward the runway, Cassandra caught a glimpse of her reflection in the cockpit glass. Her green eyes held the same determination she had seen in her father's military portraits. She was carrying on his legacy, flying missions he could never have imagined. The takeoff was flawless. The B-2 lifted off the runway with surprising grace for such a large aircraft, climbing steadily into the morning sky. As Missouri disappeared below the clouds, Cassandra felt the familiar rush of freedom that came with flight. Up here, she was in complete control, master of a machine worth more than most countries' annual budgets. The flight across the Atlantic was uneventful. She refueled twice from KC-135 tankers, the routine aerial ballet performed with precision born of countless hours of practice. As she approached the Middle East, the sun was setting behind her, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. "Spirit 2-1, contact background control on frequency 254.7, came the voice of her controller. "Switching to background control, Spirit 2-1. The new frequency crackled with activity. Multiple aircraft were operating in the area, transport planes, helicopters, fighter escorts. The war in Afghanistan was in full swing, and the airspace over the country was a complex dance of military aircraft supporting ground operations. "Spirit 2-1, backroom control, you're cleared into restricted area 77 Alpha. Be advised, ground forces are conducting operations in your target area." "Copy, Bagram. Any changes to my mission parameters?" "Negative, Spirit 2-1. Proceed as briefed." But something in the controller's voice made Cassandra uneasy. There was an edge there, a tension that suggested things were not going according to plan. Somewhere below she leveled off at her assigned altitude of 38,000 feet and activated her reconnaissance systems. The B-2's advanced sensors began painting a detailed picture of the terrain below. Infrared imagery, signals intelligence, radar mapping. Everything appeared normal for the first hour of her surveillance pattern. Then her threat detection system chimed softly. Cassandra's eyes immediately went to her defensive displays. A single radar contact had appeared on the edge of her screen, moving fast and heading in her general direction. She wasn't overly concerned. The B-2's stealth technology made her virtually invisible to most radar systems. Whatever was down there probably didn't even know she existed. But the contact wasn't alone. As she watched, 2 more appeared, then 3, then 5. Within minutes, she was tracking 10 high-speed aircraft climbing rapidly toward her altitude. "Bagram. Control, Spirit 2-1. I'm showing multiple fast movers in my area. Can you confirm friendly aircraft?" The response took longer than it should have. "Spirit 2-1, stand by. During that pause, Cassandra's blood ran cold. Her electronic warfare suite was lighting up like a Christmas tree. She was being actively scanned by multiple fire control radars, the kind used by fighter aircraft to lock onto targets before firing missiles. "Spirit 2-1, Bagram control. No friendly aircraft in your area. Unknown contacts are presumed hostile." Cassandra's training kicked in immediately. She began evasive maneuvers, turning to put distance between herself and the approaching aircraft. But something was wrong. They were tracking her perfectly, matching her every move as if they could see exactly where she was. Her secure radio crackled with an encrypted transmission. Any call sign. This is Viper 17 on emergency. Frequency. We are under attack and request immediate close air support. The voice was desperate, professional, but barely containing panic. Cassandra switched to the emergency frequency and heard chaos, automatic weapons fire, explosions, and the unmistakable sound of men fighting for their lives. Viper 17, this is Spirit 21. What's your location and status? Spirit 21, we're pinned down in grid square 7-7- Yankee-Mike. 10 enemy fighters circling overhead, strafing our position. We have casualties and need immediate air support. Cassandra checked her navigation system. Viper 17 was less than 50 miles from her current position, directly below the formation of enemy aircraft that was now climbing toward her. The pieces of the puzzle suddenly fell into place with terrifying clarity. This wasn't a coincidence. The enemy fighters weren't just randomly patrolling the area. They were part of a coordinated attack on the American ground forces below. And somehow, impossibly, they knew exactly where her supposedly invisible stealth bomber was located. Viper 17, be advised I'm tracking 10 enemy fighters in your area. They appear to be climbing to engage me at altitude. Negative, Spirit 21. They've been hitting us for the past 20 minutes. If you're up there, they don't know it yet. But Cassandra's instruments told a different story. The enemy aircraft were definitely tracking her, their intercept course too perfect to be coincidental. Someone had compromised her mission, and now both she and the ground forces below were in deadly danger. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The enemy fighters were at 25,000 feet now, still climbing hard. Cassandra made a quick calculation. At their current rate of climb, they would reach her altitude in less than 3 minutes. She had to make a decision, and she had to make it fast. Her orders were clear: conduct reconnaissance and avoid engagement. The B-2 was not designed for air-to-air combat. It carried no defensive weapons, no fighter escort, no backup plan for this scenario. Military doctrine said she should retreat to safety and call for fighter support, but Viper 17 didn't have time for doctrine. Viper 17, what's your tactical situation? We're down to 8 effectives, running low on ammo and taking casualties. Staff Sergeant Martinez is hit bad. We need immediate medical evacuation. Those fighters are making another strafing run. The sound of jet engines screaming overhead came through the radio, followed by the deadly chatter of cannon fire and men screaming. Cassandra felt her jaw clench. These were her people down there, Americans who had volunteered to serve their country, and they were dying while she flew safely overhead. She looked at her fuel gauges, enough for another 4 hours of flight time. Her defensive systems were functioning perfectly. The B-2 might not be designed for dogfighting, but it had capabilities that no enemy pilot had ever faced before. Bagram Control, Spirit 21 requesting weapons-free authorization. Spirit 21, say again your last transmission. Bagram Control, I have American forces under attack by enemy fighters. Requesting immediate weapons-free authorization for close air support. The pause was even longer this time. Spirit 21, you are not configured for air-to-air engagement. Recommend you clear the area immediately. Cassandra looked down at her hands on the controls. They were steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. This was the moment every pilot trained for but hoped never to face. The moment when following orders meant watching fellow Americans die. Viper 17, Spirit 21, help is on the way. She banked hard left and began her descent toward the enemy formation. At 35,000 feet, she was still invisible to their radar, but that wouldn't last long once she committed to the attack. She would get one chance, maybe two if she was lucky, before they knew where she was and could coordinate their response. The 10 MiG-29 fighters were spread out in a loose formation, taking turns diving down to strafe the American ground forces before climbing back up to altitude. It was a textbook ground attack pattern, and it revealed something important about their pilots. They were experienced, professional, and confident that nothing could threaten them from above. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Cassandra armed her systems and selected her targets. The B-2's advanced computers calculated firing solutions with inhuman precision, accounting for relative velocities, atmospheric conditions, and the ballistic properties of her weapons. All she had to do was follow the guidance cues and pull the trigger at exactly the right moment. "Ghost, this is for Dad," she whispered to herself, and pushed the stick forward into a shallow dive that would bring her within range of the unsuspecting enemy fighters. Cassandra's hands moved across the controls with surgical precision. B-2's weapons bay doors opened silently in the thin air at 35,000 feet, revealing an arsenal that would surprise even her own commanding officers. While officially configured for reconnaissance, her bomber carried 4 AIM-12 OM-RAM missiles, a modification that existed only in classified Pentagon files. The lead MiG-29 was completing its third strafing run when Cassandra's targeting computer achieved lock. The pilot below had no idea that death was tracking him from 7 miles above, invisible and inexorable. Through her advanced optics, she could see the muzzle flashes from his cannon as he raked the mountainside where Viper 17 was desperately taking cover. "Target acquired," she whispered, her finger hovering over the weapon release. Everything her father had taught her about aerial combat flashed through her mind. Lead the target, account for closure rate, trust your instruments, and never hesitate when American lives are at stake. The AMRAAM missile dropped cleanly from its pylon and ignited. Its rocket motor blazed to life, accelerating the weapon to over Mach 4 in seconds. The missile's active radar seeker painted the MiG with invisible energy, guiding it toward the target with lethal accuracy. Below, the MiG-29 pilot was pulling up from his attack run when his radar warning receiver began screaming. Lieutenant Colonel Dmitry Volkov, a veteran of conflicts across 3 continents, had never heard that particular tone before. His blood turned to ice as he realized what it meant. Someone had fired an active radar missile at him from beyond visual range. Break left, missile inbound," he shouted over the radio, throwing his fighter into a violent evasive maneuver. But the AMRAAM was already too close, its proximity fuse detecting the target and detonating 40 pounds of high explosive. Just after the MiG's wing route, the explosion was visible from orbit. Volkov's aircraft disintegrated in a ball of orange flame and twisted metal, debris raining down on the mountain peaks below. His wingman, Captain Yuri Petrov, watched in horror as his flight leader simply ceased to exist. "Control, Falcon 2. Falcon 1 is down. We're under attack by unknown aircraft." But their ground control station was already in chaos. The radar operators were staring at their screens in confusion, seeing the destruction of Volkov's aircraft, but detecting no enemy contacts anywhere in the area. It was as if the mountain itself had reached up and swatted the MiG from the sky. Cassandra was already maneuvering for her second shot. The enemy formation was breaking apart, pilots scattering in all directions as they tried to locate the invisible threat. But their panic was working against them. Instead of coordinating their search, they were flying predictable evasion patterns that made them easy targets for her advanced targeting systems. Captain Petrov's MiG-29 was climbing hard when the second AMRAAM found him. He had just enough time to see the missile's vapor trail before it struck his aircraft's center section, turning $40 million of Soviet engineering into falling scrap metal. Viper 1-7, Spirit 2-1. 2 targets down, 8 remaining. What's your status down there? Staff Sergeant Martinez's voice crackled back through heavy static. Spirit 2-1. I don't know who you are or where you came from, but keep it up. They've stopped their attack runs. Looks like they're trying to find you. Indeed they were. The remaining 8 MiG-29s had formed into 2 4-ship formations, climbing rapidly while their radars swept the sky in desperate search patterns. Captain Boris Kozlov, now the senior pilot, was coordinating the search from his position at 28,000 feet. Spread formation, active search pattern Delta. Whatever hit Falcon 1 and 2 has to be up there somewhere. But Cassandra was already adapting to their new tactics. She rolled inverted and pulled into a steep dive, using the B-2's superior altitude to position herself above and behind the eastern formation. The stealth bomber's angular surfaces scattered enemy radar signals into harmless static, making her effectively invisible even at close range. The third kill came as a complete surprise to Senior Lieutenant Ivan Kuznetsov. He was focused on his radar display, trying to make sense of the electronic noise that seemed to be everywhere, when an AMRAAM struck his aircraft from directly above. The missile punched through his canopy before detonating, and Kuznetsov never knew what killed him. His wingman, Lieutenant Pavel Gorsky, saw the explosion and immediately pulled into a violent climbing turn. His radio filled with panicked voices as the remaining pilots realized they were facing something beyond their understanding. Control. Falcon 5 were being engaged by a stealth aircraft. Repeat, enemy stealth aircraft are engaging our formation. The response from ground control was swift and chilling. All Falcon elements, you are authorized to engage any contacts. Use all available weapons. Cassandra heard the transmission on her electronic warfare suite and smiled grimly. They were finally admitting she existed, which meant they were probably vectoring additional assets toward her position. She needed to end this quickly before the odds shifted too far against her. The fourth target was Lieutenant Gorsky himself. His MiG-29 was still climbing when Cassandra's final AMRAAM locked onto his heat signature. The missile tracked perfectly, its warhead detonating just behind the fighter's exhaust nozzles and sending burning fragments through the engine bay. Gorsky managed to eject just before his aircraft became an uncontrollable fireball. Winchester. On AIM is, Cassandra reported to herself, using pilot slang for empty weapons pylons. But she wasn't done fighting. The B-2 carried other surprises that weren't in any official manual. Captain Kozlov was now down to 6 aircraft and growing increasingly desperate. His formation had tightened up, the pilots flying close enough to provide mutual support, but spread out enough to avoid being taken out by a single weapon. It was a sound tactical decision that might have worked against conventional aircraft, but the B-2 Spirit wasn't conventional by any measure. Cassandra activated her defensive electronic warfare suite in offensive mode, a capability that existed only in theoretical papers and highly classified test programs. The powerful jammers that normally protected her from enemy radar became focused weapons, capable of burning out sensitive electronics at close range. Lieutenant Sergei Volsky was the first to experience the new threat. His radar display suddenly went white with interference, then went completely black as the sensitive receiver circuits overloaded and failed. A moment later, his navigation systems followed, then his communications gear, then his engine management. Computer, mayday, mayday, complete electrical failure. Volsky shouted into his dead radio, fighting to control an aircraft that was rapidly becoming unflyable. Without computer assistance, the MiG-29 was barely stable, requiring constant pilot input to maintain level flight. Cassandra watched through her targeting pod as the enemy fighter began to wobble and lose altitude. Electronic warfare kills weren't as spectacular as missile strikes, but they were just as effective. Volsky's aircraft was out of the fight, regardless of whether he crashed or managed to limp home. Captain Kozlov saw his wingman's predicament and made a command decision that would have impressed his instructors at the fighter weapons school. Instead of trying to help Volsky, he ordered his remaining 4 aircraft to climb to maximum altitude and spread out in a search pattern that would make them harder to target. All Falcon elements climb to Angels 35 and execute search. Pattern Bravo, stay alert for electronic attack. It was smart tactics, but Cassandra had been expecting it. She rolled the B-2 into a descending spiral, using gravity to build airspeed while her electronic warfare officers, all programs running autonomously in her advanced computers, began targeting the enemy formation's communications frequencies. The psychological effect was immediate and devastating. One by one, the MiG pilots found themselves cut off from their formation, unable to communicate with their leader or coordinate their movements. In aerial combat, loss of communications was often a death sentence. Lieutenant Alexei Petrov, no relation to the earlier casualty, was the first to break formation. Isolated and unable to raise anyone on the radio, he made the rational decision to disengage and return to base. But as he turned southeast toward home, Cassandra was waiting. The B-2's electronic warfare suite focused on Petrov's aircraft, like a magnifying glass concentrating sunlight. His flight management computer failed first, followed by his autopilot, then his inertial navigation system. Within 30 seconds, he was flying a $40 million aircraft with the avionics of a 1960s trainer. Petrov ejected while he still could, his parachute blooming white against the brown mountains below. His MiG-29 continued southeast for another 2 minutes before impacting a glacier at over 500 miles per hour. Captain Kozlov was running out of options and running out of time. 3 of his remaining pilots had lost radio contact, and he could see at least 2 of them beginning to turn for home. His own radar was being jammed intermittently, showing ghost contacts that appeared and disappeared like electronic phantoms. Control. Falcon Leader, I need immediate support. Vector any available assets to Grid 7-7- Yankee-Mike. But their ground control station was having problems of its own. Cassandra's electronic warfare suite was operating on multiple frequencies, simultaneously jamming not just aircraft radars, but ground-based air defense systems as well. The enemy's integrated air defense network was collapsing under the weight of her electronic assault. Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Kozlov, the formation leader's younger brother, was the next to fall victim to the invisible American pilot. His navigation computer failed during a high G-turn, causing him to lose spatial orientation in the thin air at 35,000 feet. By the time he recovered control of his aircraft, he was in an unrecoverable flat spin. His ejection seat fired just as his MiG began to tumble out of control, the G-forces already exceeding human tolerance. The parachute deployed properly, but Kozlov was unconscious from the acceleration, drifting down toward the mountains with no way to control his descent. That left Captain Kozlov with just 2 wingmen, both of whom were showing signs of wanting to disengage. Their fuel was running low after 20 minutes of high G maneuvering at altitude, and their electronic systems were being systematically disabled by an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't track, and couldn't fight. But Boris Kozlov hadn't survived 3 wars by giving up when the odds turned against him. He had one last card to play, a tactic so dangerous that it was normally forbidden except in the most desperate circumstances. Falcon 7 and 8, form on me for ramming attack. We're going to find this ghost and take it down with us. It was a suicide mission, plain and simple. Without radar locks or visual contact, they would have to search for the stealth aircraft by the process of elimination. flying search patterns until they either found their target or ran out of fuel. And when they found it, they would ram it, trading their lives for the destruction of whatever advanced. Aircraft was decimating their formation. Cassandra heard the transmission through her electronic warfare suite and felt a chill run down her spine. She had faced desperate enemies before, but never ones willing to commit suicide just to take her down. The 3 remaining MiG-29s were climbing toward her position, their pilots committed to a final, deadly gamble. Below them all, Staff Sergeant Martinez and his men watched the aerial battle unfold through their night vision scopes. They could see the explosions, the falling debris, the occasional parachute drifting down from the darkness above. But they had no idea that one American pilot in an invisible bomber was single-handedly destroying an entire enemy fighter squadron. Viper 17, Spirit 21. Enemy formation is down to 3 aircraft, but they're attempting a desperation attack. I may need to go defensive for a few minutes. Roger, Spirit 21. We're still taking sporadic ground fire, but nothing. Like before, whatever you're doing up there, it's working. Cassandra checked her fuel gauges and weapon status. She was down to electronic warfare and one last surprise that she hoped she wouldn't need to use. The 3 remaining MiGs were climbing rapidly, spread out in a search formation that would be difficult to avoid at close range. Time to see. If the B-2's designers had thought of everything. Captain Boris Kozlov pulled his MiG-29 into a punishing vertical climb, his G-suit inflating to keep blood flow into his brain as the fighter clawed for altitude. At 38,000 feet, the air was so thin that his engines were barely producing half their rated thrust, but desperation drove him upward into the death zone, where only the most advanced aircraft could operate effectively. Falcon 7. Take heading 270. Falcon 8, heading 090. We'll triangulate and flush this phantom out, he commanded through gritted teeth, sweat beading on his forehead despite the sub-zero temperatures outside his canopy. Lieutenant Colonel Vasily Orlov, calcined Falcon 7, acknowledged the order with grim determination. At 51 years old, he was the most experienced pilot in the squadron, a veteran who had flown combat missions from Syria to Sudan. If anyone could locate an invisible enemy, it would be him. He banked his MiG hard left, ignoring the protests. From his overstressed airframe. Captain Nikolai Romanov, Falcon 8 was the youngest pilot in the formation at 26. His hands shook slightly on the controls as he turned east, not from fear but from pure adrenaline. He had joined the Air Force to test himself against the best pilots in the world, and now he was facing an opponent who had single-handedly destroyed 7 of his squadron mates without showing himself once. Cassandra watched their movements on her threat display, calculating intercept angles and closure rates with the cold precision of a chess master. The 3 MiGs were executing a classic search pattern designed to force her into a predictable response. It was textbook tactics, and it might have worked against any other aircraft, but the B-2 Spirit had one more technological marvel that even most American pilots didn't know about. She activated the experimental adaptive camouflage system, a quantum leap beyond traditional stealth technology. Microscopic sensors across the bomber's skin analyzed the surrounding light spectrum and adjusted the aircraft's surface coating to match, creating optical invisibility to complement the radar stealth. It was technology that wouldn't see widespread deployment for another decade, but Cassandra's bomber was a testbed for capabilities that pushed the boundaries of physics. The first sign of the system's effectiveness came when Captain Kozlov flew directly beneath her position, close enough that she could see the pilot's helmet through her belly camera. His radar was sweeping in all directions, the electronic beam passing through her aircraft's location repeatedly without detecting anything more significant than a small flock of high-altitude birds. Control, Falcon Leader. Negative contact at Angels 38, move into 40,000. The enemy ground controller's voice crackled back with barely controlled panic. Falcon leader, be advised we're tracking debris patterns suggesting at least 6 confirmed kills. Unknown aircraft are extremely hostile and appear to have beyond visual range capability. Kozlov's jaw tightened. 6 confirmed kills meant that whatever was hunting them had already proven itself deadlier than anything in their intelligence files. American stealth technology was advancing faster than their analysts had predicted, and his pilots were paying the price for that intelligence failure. Lieutenant Colonel Orlov was having his own revelation 3 miles to the west. His passive infrared sensor had detected a thermal anomaly at 41,000 feet, just a brief signature, barely distinguishable from background radiation, but enough to make him suspect something was there. Falcon leader, possible thermal contact bearing 035, range unknown. Intermittent signature consistent with high-altitude aircraft. Cassandra saw Orlov's Meg beginning to turn toward her position and made a split-second decision. Instead of running, she rolled inverted and pulled into a steep dive, using gravity to accelerate the massive bomber to speeds that would strain its airframe. The maneuver was risky. The B-2 wasn't designed for aggressive dogfighting, but it would position her for what military pilots called a defensive BVR engagement. Beyond visual range combat was supposed to be the B-2's strength, but she was out of long-range missiles. What she did have was the most sophisticated electronic warfare suite ever installed in an aircraft, and she was about to use it in ways its designers never intended. As Orlov's Meg climbed toward her last known position, Cassandra activated every jammer, every deception transmitter, every electronic countermeasure in her arsenal simultaneously. The result was electromagnetic chaos on a scale that hadn't been seen since the height of the Cold War. Orlov's cockpit erupted in warning lights as his systems began failing in cascade sequence. First, his radar display went white with interference. Then his navigation computer crashed. Then his engine management system began cycling between failure modes. Within seconds, his sophisticated fighter had been reduced to a barely controllable flying machine. Mayday! Mayday! Complete electronic failure. He broadcast on guard frequency, fighting to maintain level flight as his Meg began to porpoise through the thin air. His ejection seat was still functional, but at 40,000 feet, survival after ejection was far from guaranteed. Captain Romanov heard his wingman's distress call and immediately turned to assist, but Cassandra was already moving to her next target. The young pilot's MiG-29 was climbing hard when her electronic warfare suite focused on his aircraft. Like a laser beam of pure electromagnetic energy, the effect was even more dramatic than with Orlov's fighter. Romanov's heads-up display exploded in a shower of sparks, burning out his retinas and filling his cockpit with acrid smoke. His flight computer crashed so catastrophically that it sent conflicting commands to his flight controls, causing the Meg to snap into an uncontrolled roll that generated G-forces beyond human endurance. Romanov's last conscious thought was wondering how an invisible enemy could be so precisely lethal. His ejection seat fired automatically when his G-suit sensors detected him losing consciousness, blasting him clear of the tumbling aircraft just before it entered a flat spin that no pilot could have recovered from. That left Captain Kozlov alone. At 40,000 feet, the sole survivor of what had been a full squadron just 30 minutes earlier. His radio was filled with the sound of emergency beacons from ejected pilots, and his radar screen showed nothing but electronic noise that could have been hiding a dozen enemy aircraft. But Boris Kozlov had survived 3 wars by being smarter and more ruthless than his enemies. Instead of trying to locate the invisible American bomber, he made a decision that would have impressed Sun Tzu himself. He began to retreat, but not in the direction his enemy would expect. Instead of heading southeast toward his home base, he turned northwest, toward the position where the American ground forces were still pinned down. If he couldn't find the stealth aircraft, he would force it to reveal itself by threatening the very soldiers it was trying to protect. Cassandra saw his course change immediately and felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Kozlov was gambling that she wouldn't risk the lives of American troops, even to preserve her own invisibility. It was a shrewd tactical decision by a pilot who understood the psychology of warfare. Viper 1-7, Spirit 2-1. Single enemy. Fighter inbound to your position. Take cover immediately. Staff Sergeant Martinez's reply came back tense but professional. Roger, Spirit 2-1. We're as covered as we can get in this terrain. Can you intercept? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Cassandra could intercept, but it would mean exposing herself to visual detection. At close range, even the B-2's advanced stealth technology couldn't hide the bomber's massive size and distinctive silhouette. Once Kozlov saw her, the secret of American stealth capabilities would be compromised, assuming he survived to report it. But 8 American soldiers were about to die if she didn't act. Viper 1-7, intercept is inbound. Danger close, keep your heads down. She rolled the B-2 into a knife-edge descent that would have been impossible in any other bomber. The massive aircraft plummeted through the thin air like a falling anvil. Its adaptive camouflage system struggling to maintain optical invisibility during such aggressive maneuvering. Captain Kozlov was lining up for his strafing run when something impossible happened. The mountain peak directly in front of him seemed to shimmer and distort, as if heat waves were rising from the snow-covered summit. His brain, conditioned by years of combat experience, recognized the phenomenon immediately. Active camouflage. Optical stealth. Technology that supposedly didn't exist outside of laboratory prototypes. Mother of God, he whispered, pulling his mag into a hard climbing turn just as the B-2 Spirit materialized out of thin air less than 500 meters. In front of him, for a moment, the 2 aircraft flew almost parallel courses, close enough that each pilot could see the other clearly. Kozlov stared in awe at the angular, bat-like shape of the American bomber, its faceted surfaces designed to scatter radar energy into harmless static. It was larger than he had expected, and more alien-looking than anything in his experience. Cassandra met his gaze through her cockpit glass, 2 warriors acknowledging each other across the divide of nationality and ideology. She could see the intelligence in his eyes, the recognition that he was facing something beyond his understanding or ability to counter. Then the moment passed, and both pilots remembered they were trying to kill each other. Kozlov's cannon shells traced glowing arcs through the air where the B-2 had been a split second earlier, but Cassandra was already pulling into a climbing spiral that used the bomber's superior power-to-weight ratio at high altitude. The MiG-29 was more maneuverable at sea level, but up here in the death zone, the American bomber had advantages that Soviet designers had never anticipated. The 2 aircraft began a deadly dance at altitude, spiraling upward through air so thin that both pilots were breathing pure oxygen to remain conscious. Kozlov fired his remaining air-to-air missiles, but the B-2's electronic warfare suite spoofed them effortlessly, sending the weapons chasing false targets that existed only as electronic phantoms. In desperation, he tried to ram the American bomber, throwing his MiG into a collision course that would have destroyed both aircraft. But Cassandra had been expecting the maneuver, and she pulled the B-2 into a vertical climb that the lighter MiG couldn't match. At 45,000 feet, Kozlov's engines finally flamed out in the thin air. His MiG became a ballistic projectile, following a parabolic arc that would end in the mountains below. He had perhaps 30 seconds to decide whether to eject or try to restart his engines during the descent. He chose to fight to the end. As his MiG fell past the climbing B-2, Kozlov managed one last burst from his cannon, the shells climbing upward on ballistic trajectories that converged on the bomber's position. It was a 1,000,000-to-1 shot, requiring perfect timing and an intuitive understanding of 3-dimensional ballistics that only the most gifted pilots possessed. Two 30mm shells struck the B-2's port wing, punching through the composite skin and severing hydraulic lines that controlled the bomber's flight surfaces. Warning lights flooded Cassandra's cockpit as the aircraft began to yaw uncontrollably, the damaged wing generating asymmetric lift that threatened to put her into an unrecoverable spin. But the shells had also sealed Kozlov's fate. The muzzle flash from his cannon had consumed the last of his aircraft's electrical power, leaving him with no way to restart his engines. His MiG continued its ballistic descent toward the mountains, its pilot unconscious from oxygen starvation in the thin air. Captain Boris Kozlov, veteran of 3 wars and the finest pilot his Air Force had ever produced, impacted the side of a mountain at 600 miles per hour. The explosion was visible from orbit, a brief orange flower blooming against the eternal snow. Cassandra fought to control her damaged bomber as it descended through the middle altitudes, its stealth coating breached and its electronic signature now visible to every radar within 200 miles. She had won the engagement, but at a cost that would resonate through the highest levels of military command. The secret of American stealth technology had been revealed, witnessed by ground observers and recorded by enemy surveillance systems. The age of invisible warfare was ending just as it had begun, but 8 American soldiers were still alive because of her choice to engage. And sometimes that was enough. The B-2 Spirit shuddered violently as Cassandra fought to maintain control, her left wing trailing hydraulic fluid in a crimson stream that froze instantly in the sub-zero air. The bomber's fly-by-wire flight control system was compensating for the asymmetric damage, but warning tones filled her headset with urgent electronic voices demanding her attention. Hydraulic system alpha failure, backup system engaged. Structural damage detected, flight envelope restricted. Stealth integrity compromised, radar signature increasing. Cassandra silenced the warnings with practiced efficiency, her fingers dancing across the touchscreen displays as she assessed the damage. The 30mm shells from Kozlov's final desperate attack had punched through the wing's composite skin and severed primary hydraulic lines, but the backup systems were holding. More critically, the damage had created radar reflective edges that made her bomber visible to ground-based air defense systems across a 100-mile radius. Her secure radio crackled with an encrypted transmission from Bagram Air Base. Spirit 2-1, we're showing your transponder code on multiple threat radars. What's your status? Bagram Control, Spirit 2-1 is code yellow with hydraulic damage and compromised stealth capability. Request immediate vector to friendly airspace. The pause that followed told her everything she needed to know. With her stealth coating breached, she was now visible to every surface-to-air missile site in the region. The invisibility that had allowed her to destroy an entire enemy squadron was gone, replaced by the electronic signature of a massive, slow-moving target at medium altitude. Spirit 2-1. The advised were tracking multiple SAM sites lighting up across your route home. Recommend immediate descent to nap of the Earth altitude and emergency egress heading 270. Nap of the Earth meant flying just above the mountain peaks, using terrain masking to avoid radar detection. It was dangerous flying in any aircraft, potentially suicidal in a damaged bomber with compromised flight controls. But it was her only chance of making it home alive. Cassandra pushed the nose down into a controlled descent, the bomber's massive wings groaning under aerodynamic loads they weren't designed to handle. At 25,000 feet, she felt the aircraft trying to roll left as the damaged wing lost lift, but the fly-by-wire system corrected automatically, keeping her on course through electronic intervention. Below her, the mountains of Afghanistan stretched endlessly in all directions, their snow-covered peaks gleaming like knife blades in the starlight. She had flown over this terrain dozens of times, but never from this low altitude and never in a damaged aircraft that might not respond to her commands when she needed it most. Viper 1-7, Spirit 2-1. Status report on your position. Staff. Sergeant Martinez's voice came back immediately, professional despite the chaos his unit had endured. Spirit 2-1, we've got the area secured. Whatever you did up there worked. No more enemy air activity. We're treating casualties and waiting for medevac. Roger, Viper 1-7. A medical helicopter should be inbound to your position within 20 minutes. Stay alert for additional enemy ground forces. What she didn't tell Martinez was that her damaged bomber had probably attracted every hostile unit within 50 miles. The radar signature that made her visible to SAM sites would also alert enemy commanders that a major American asset was in distress. They would be vectoring ground forces toward any possible crash site, hoping to capture advanced technology or take prisoners. At 15,000 feet, her threat warning system lit up like a Christmas tree. 4 different radar sites were tracking her bomber, their fire control systems calculating intercept solutions for surface-to-air missiles. The closest site was less than 30 miles away, well within range of modern SAM systems. Bagram Control. Spirit 2-1. I'm being painted by multiple fire control radars. Request immediate SEAD support. SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses, meant sending other aircraft to attack the radar sites that were tracking her. But at this hour of the night, with most assets committed to other missions, she knew the response would be limited. Spirit 2-1, we have 2 F-16s en route your position, ETA 15 minutes. Can you evade until then? 15 minutes might as well have been 15 hours. At her current altitude and airspeed, the SAM sites would have multiple opportunities to engage her bomber before any help arrived. She needed to disappear again, and quickly. The solution came from an unexpected source, the mountains themselves. Afghanistan's terrain was notoriously difficult for aircraft operations, with peaks reaching over 20,000 feet and valleys that twisted through seemingly impossible configurations. But those same mountains that made flying dangerous could also provide cover from radar detection. Cassandra banked hard right, following a valley that led northwest toward Pakistan. The walls rose steeply on both sides, limiting her maneuvering room, but blocking the radar beams from the SAM sites. Her radar altimeter showed less than 1,000 feet between her bomber and the rocky peaks, a margin that would have terrified most pilots. But Cassandra had trained for the scenario in the simulators at Nellis Air Force Base, practicing low altitude penetration routes through terrain that was considered unflyable by conventional aircraft. The B-2's advanced terrain-following radar painted a 3-dimensional picture of the landscape ahead, allowing her to thread the bomber through gaps that seemed impossibly narrow. The damaged hydraulic system made every maneuver a calculated risk. Without full flight control authority, she had to anticipate the bomber's responses and compensate for the asymmetric lift from her damaged wing. It was like flying an aircraft that wanted to kill her, requiring constant attention and perfect timing to maintain control. At 8,000 feet, above sea level, less than 3,000 feet above the valley floor, she encountered her first surface-to-air missile launch. The SAM site had been hidden in a cave complex, its radar dish emerging only long enough to acquire a firing solution before launching a Russian-made S-300 missile. The weapon climbed rapidly, its rocket motor burning white-hot against the star-filled sky. Cassandra saw it immediately on her threat display and pulled the bomber into a hard left turn that stressed her damaged airframe to its limits. The S-300 overshot her position by less than a mile, its proximity fuse failing to detonate because the B-2's reduced radar signature confused its target. Discrimination software, but the near miss had cost her precious altitude and airspeed. The bomber was now flying barely 500 feet above the valley floor, its massive wings creating downdrafts that kicked up snow and debris from the mountainsides. She was committed to this route now. Any attempt to climb would expose her to the remaining SAM sites. The valley ahead curved sharply to the left, requiring a banking turn that would test her damaged flight controls. Cassandra held her breath as she rolled the bomber into the turn, feeling the aircraft want to continue rolling past vertical as the damaged wing lost lift. Only the fly-by-wire system's constant corrections kept her from impacting the mountainside. As she completed the turn, her forward-looking infrared sensor detected movement on the valley floor below. A convoy of vehicles was racing along a primitive road, their headlights cutting through the darkness as they tried to intercept her probable flight path. Enemy ground forces moving to set up anti-aircraft weapons at the valley's exit point. Bagram. Control, Spirit 2-1. I've got hostile ground forces setting up blocking positions in my egress route. What's the ETA on those F-16s? Spirit 2-1. Viper flight is still 10 minutes out. Can you find an alternate route? Cassandra checked her navigation display. The valley she was following was the only practical route through this section of mountains. Every other possible path would require climbing to altitudes where the SAM sites could engage her bomber with near certainty of success. She was trapped in a canyon with enemies at both ends, flying a damaged aircraft that might fail at any moment. It was exactly the kind of situation that separated the exceptional pilots from the merely competent. The solution required thinking like her father would have, not like a bomber pilot trying to avoid combat, but like a fighter pilot looking for any advantage that could turn the tables on her enemies. The B-2 might be damaged, but it still carried capabilities that no ground force could match. She activated her remaining electronic warfare systems, not for defense but for offense. The powerful jammers that had disabled enemy fighters could also disrupt ground-based communications and radar systems. If she couldn't avoid the blocking force, she could at least blind them until help arrived. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The convoy below suddenly stopped moving as their communications were severed and their night vision systems overloaded. Vehicle commanders who had been coordinating their movements found themselves isolated, unable to contact their headquarters or each other. But electronic warfare was a double-edged sword. The same jamming that disrupted enemy systems also made it impossible for her to communicate with friendly forces. She was now completely alone, flying through hostile territory in a damaged aircraft with no way to call for help. The valley began to widen ahead, opening into a broader plain where the enemy convoy was setting up their anti-aircraft weapons. Through her targeting pod, she could see soldiers unpacking shoulder-fired missiles and setting up heavy machine guns. They might not be able to communicate with each other, but they could still see and hear her bomber approaching. Cassandra made a decision that would have horrified her instructors at flight school. Instead of trying to avoid the enemy positions, she aimed directly for them. The B-2's massive size and alien appearance would create a psychological effect that might compensate for her lack of weapons. At 200 feet above ground level, traveling at over 400 miles per hour, the stealth bomber roared over the enemy positions like something from a nightmare. The psychological impact was everything she had hoped for. Soldiers dove for cover, abandoning their weapons as the enormous aircraft passed overhead with a sound like tearing fabric. But her gamble came with a price. The low altitude, high speed flight was consuming fuel at an alarming rate, and the stress on her damaged airframe was approaching critical levels. Warning lights indicated structural fatigue in multiple locations, and her backup hydraulic system was showing pressure fluctuations that suggested imminent failure. She had perhaps 10 minutes of flight time remaining before the bomber would become uncontrollable. 10 minutes to cover the remaining distance to friendly airspace, where F-16 fighters could provide escort protection for her final approach to Bagram Air Base. Behind her, the enemy soldiers were recovering from their shock and reporting her position to higher headquarters. Every radar site and SAM battery in the region would soon know exactly where she was and which direction she was heading. The hunt was about to intensify beyond anything she had faced so far. Cassandra checked her fuel gauges one more time and pushed the throttles forward. The B-2's engines responded with a surge of power that pressed her back into her ejection seat, accelerating the massive bomber to speeds that made the mountains blur past in a stream of gray and white. She was racing against time, mechanical failure, and an entire air defense network that wanted her dead. The next few minutes would determine whether she made it home as a hero or became another casualty of the war in Afghanistan. The B-2 Spirit screamed across the Afghan landscape at barely 50 feet above the deck, its shadow racing across moonlit valleys like a harbinger of technological warfare. Cassandra's hands were steady on the controls, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system, but she could feel the bomber fighting her with every maneuver. The backup hydraulic system was failing gradually, requiring more and more control. Input to maintain level flight. Her threat warning receiver had gone silent, not because the danger had passed, but because she was flying too low for most radar systems to track effectively. The mountains provided natural screening, but they also created a deadly maze where one wrong turn could send her bomber into a cliff face at 400 miles per hour. Through her night vision system, she spotted the lights of a major highway. Ahead, the main supply route that connected Kabul with the Pakistani border. Intelligence briefings had warned that this area was heavily defended, with multiple air defense sites protecting the critical transportation corridor. But it was also her shortest path to friendly territory. "Come on, Ghost," she whispered to herself, using her father's nickname for her. Dad didn't make it through Desert Storm by playing it safe. The decision to cross the highway meant exposing herself to whatever air defenses were positioned along the route. But her fuel situation was becoming critical. Less than 20 minutes of flight time remaining at current consumption rates. She couldn't afford to take the long way around. As she approached the highway, her electronic warfare suite detected multiple radar emissions painting the sky ahead. At least 6 different air defense sites were operating in the area, their overlapping coverage zones creating a virtually impenetrable barrier for conventional aircraft. But the B-2's damaged stealth signature was somewhere between fully stealthy and completely visible, a gray area. That might just be enough. The first SAM site detected her as she crossed into the highway corridor. An S-400 battery, hidden among a cluster of buildings, locked onto her bomber and launched 2 missiles in rapid succession. The weapons climbed rapidly, their rocket motors creating brilliant streaks against the star-filled sky. Cassandra saw them coming and pulled into a violent climbing turn that stressed her airframe beyond design limits. The bomber's composite skin creaked ominously as G-forces exceeded normal operational parameters, but the maneuver broke the missile's lock-on. Both SAMs detonated harmlessly behind her position, their proximity fuses triggered by electronic countermeasures, but the evasive maneuver had cost her precious altitude and revealed her position to every air defense site within 50 miles. Her radar warning receiver erupted in a cacophony of threat tones as multiple systems acquired track on her bomber. "Spirit 2-1, Viper lead. We have a visual on your position and are moving to engage hostile air defenses." The voice belonged to Major Jake Razor Sullivan, callsign Viper lead, flying the lead F-16 in a 2-ship formation that had finally reached her area. Through her targeting pod, Cassandra could see the fighters approaching from the southeast, their afterburners painting orange trails across the darkness. Viper lead, Spirit 2-1. Multiple SAM sites active along Highway Alpha, on taking fire, and have limited maneuvering capability due to battle damage. Copy, Spirit 2-1. We're going to clear a path for you. Stay low and follow our lead. Major Sullivan was a veteran of over 200 combat missions, a pilot who understood that sometimes the rulebook had to be thrown out the window. His F-16S carried AGM-88HARM missiles, specifically designed to home in on enemy radar emissions, and he intended to use every one of them. The first harm launch came as Cassandra was dodging another SAM barrage. Sullivan's missile streaked ahead, of the formation, its seeker head locked onto the S-40 battery that had engaged her bomber. The weapon impacted the radar dish in a spectacular explosion that lit up the night sky and eliminated one threat from the equation. But there were still 5 more SAM sites operating, and they had learned from their colleagues' destruction. Instead of maintaining constant radar illumination, they began using pop-up tactics, turning their systems on just long enough to acquire a firing solution before shutting down to avoid harm attacks. The cat-and-mouse game that followed pushed all 3 aircraft to their operational limits. Cassandra's bomber served as an unwilling decoy, drawing SAM launches that revealed enemy positions for the F-16s to attack. Sullivan and his wingman, Captain Lisa Phoenix Chun, used their superior maneuverability to dodge missiles while delivering precision strikes against the air defense network. Spirit 2-1, turn left heading 240 and descend to 500 feet. Sullivan commanded as another SAM streaked past the bomber's damaged wing. There's a valley system that should provide radar masking for the next 15 miles. Cassandra banked into the turn, feeling her flight controls becoming increasingly sluggish as hydraulic pressure continued to bleed away. The bomber wanted to roll beyond vertical, its damaged wing creating asymmetric lift that threatened to put her into an unrecoverable spin. Viper lead, I'm losing flight control authority. Hydraulic system is failing faster than anticipated. Roger. Spirit 2-1, we'll stay with you. Phoenix, take high cover and watch for additional threats. Captain Chun's F-16 climbed to 10,000 feet, positioning herself to intercept any enemy fighters that might be vectoring toward their formation. Her radar was painting multiple contacts to the north, at least 4 fast-moving aircraft. That could be additional MiGs scrambling to engage the damaged bomber. The valley Cassandra was following curved sharply to the right, requiring a banking turn that tested her remaining flight control capability. She rolled the bomber into the turn, but the damaged wing stalled unexpectedly, dropping her toward the rocky mountainside below. For a terrifying moment, the B-2 fell like a stone, its massive bulk plummeting toward certain destruction. Cassandra fought the controls desperately, using every technique her father had taught her about recovering from unusual attitudes. She managed to regain control barely 200 feet above the valley floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. Spirit 2-1, we saw that recovery. Outstanding airmanship, Sullivan radioed, genuine admiration in his voice. Most pilots would have ejected rather than risk riding a damaged bomber into the ground. But Cassandra wasn't most pilots. She was the daughter of a Desert Storm veteran, a woman who had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. Ejecting would mean abandoning the most advanced aircraft in the American inventory to enemy hands, potentially compromising decades of technological development. Viper lead, Spirit 2-1. I'm going to try to make it to Bagram. How far to friendly? Airspace? 37 miles, but we've got problems inbound. Phoenix is tracking 4 bogies approaching from the north, probably MiG-29s. ETA to intercept is 8 minutes. 8 minutes. Cassandra checked her fuel gauges and hydraulic pressure readings. She might have enough fuel to reach Bagram, but her flight controls were degrading rapidly. In 8 minutes, she would be flying a bomber that responded like a freight train to control inputs. The approaching MiGs represented the enemy's final gambit, a last-ditch attempt to prevent the damaged stealth bomber from reaching safety. Intelligence reports suggested these were elite pilots, possibly Russians or other foreign advisors flying under false flags. They would be highly skilled and extremely motivated to prevent American stealth technology from escaping their grasp. Phoenix Viper lead, what's your assessment of the inbound threats? Captain Chun's voice came back tense but professional. 4 contacts in tactical formation, approaching at high speed and medium altitude. Radar signatures consistent with MiG-29 fulcrums. They're definitely coming for our package. The package was Cassandra's bomber, carrying technology secrets worth billions of dollars and strategic advantages that could shift the balance of power in future conflicts. Every intelligence agency in the world would pay enormous sums for access to the B-2's advanced systems. Spirit 2-1, we're going to have to split up, Sullivan announced. Phoenix and I will engage the MiGs while you continue toward Bagram. Can you make it alone? It was a question that went to the heart of every pilot's worst nightmare, flying a damaged aircraft through hostile territory without fighter escort. But Cassandra had already proven herself against impossible odds, and she wasn't about to quit with safety so close. Affirmative, Viper lead. I'll see you at the club. The club was pilot slang for the officers' club at Bagram, where successful missions were celebrated with drinks and war stories. It was a promise between warriors, a commitment that they would all make it home alive. Sullivan's F-16 peeled away to the north, followed closely by Captain Chun's fighter. Within minutes, Cassandra could see the distant flashes of air-to-air missiles as the two F-16s engaged 4 MiG-29s in a battle that would determine whether she lived or died. Alone again in the damaged bomber, she pushed deeper into the valley system that led toward Pakistan and safety. Her hydraulic pressure was down to minimum levels, requiring full deflection of her control surfaces to maintain level flight. The bomber was becoming increasingly difficult to control, wallowing through the air like a wounded whale. But she was still flying, still fighting, still carrying the hopes of 8 American soldiers who owed their lives to her willingness to engage impossible odds. The memory of Staff Sergeant Martinez's desperate radio call drove her forward through pain and exhaustion toward the distant lights of Bagram Air Base. Behind her, the aerial battle raged across the night sky as F-16s and MiGs fought for supremacy in three-dimensional space. The outcome of that battle would determine whether her sacrifice had been worthwhile, whether the most advanced bomber in the world would make it home or become a trophy in an enemy museum. Cassandra checked her navigation system one more time and smiled grimly. 22 miles to safety, and she was still flying. Her father would have been proud. The lights of Bagram Air Base appeared on the horizon like a constellation of hope, their amber glow cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Cassandra's hands trembled slightly on the controls, not from fear, but from the physical exhaustion of fighting a dying aircraft for the past hour. The B-2's backup hydraulic system had finally failed completely, leaving her with manual reversion, controls that required the strength of a powerlifter to operate. Bagram Tower, Spirit 2-1 declaring emergency. Inbound with battle damage, hydraulic failure, and minimum fuel. The tower controller's response was immediate and professional. Spirit 2-1, Bagram Tower, you're cleared for straight in. Approach runway 09. Emergency vehicles are standing by. Winds calm, visibility unlimited. Through her targeting pod, she could see the crash trucks and ambulances positioning themselves along the runway, their red and blue lights creating a welcoming committee she never thought she would be so happy to see. But first, she had to get the massive bomber on the ground in one piece. The approach required every skill her father had taught her about flying damaged aircraft. Without hydraulic assistance, the flight controls felt like they were filled with concrete, requiring both hands and all her upper body strength to make even small corrections. The damaged wing created a constant rolling moment that tried to flip the bomber inverted, forcing her to maintain constant pressure on the stick. At 5 miles out, her fuel flow indicators showed less than 2 minutes of flying time remaining. She was cutting it impossibly close, but ejecting now would mean losing the aircraft just short of safety. The irony would have been unbearable. Spirit 2-1, you're slightly left of centerline. Suggest heading correction to 095. Unable. Tower, I'm flying this thing with manual controls. Whatever I can line up with is what we're landing on. The tower controller understood immediately. Manual reversion meant she was essentially flying a glider with the aerodynamic properties of A brick. The fact that she had gotten this far was already a minor miracle. At 3 miles, the runway lights resolved into distinct points of illumination, creating a golden pathway through the darkness. Cassandra lowered the landing gear manually, feeling. The bomber's drag increased dramatically as the wheels and doors extended into the airstream. Her airspeed began bleeding away faster than she had anticipated. "Power, need power," she muttered, advancing the throttles to their stops. The engines responded sluggishly, their fuel-starved turbines struggling to maintain thrust. She was in a race between momentum and gravity. With the runway approaching at an alarming rate, the touchdown was more controlled crash than precision landing. The B-2 hit the runway hard, its main gear absorbing the impact with a sound like thunder. Cassandra immediately deployed the drag chute and reversed thrust, using every available method to stop the massive aircraft before it ran out of runway. The bomber rolled for what seemed like an eternity, its damaged flight controls making it impossible to maintain directional control. She felt the aircraft wanting to veer left toward the runway lights, but the manual controls responded just enough to keep her pointed, roughly straight ahead. When the B-2 finally came to rest, still on the runway but angled 30 degrees off centerline, Cassandra's first emotion was disbelief. She had actually made it. Against all odds, through mechanical failure and enemy action, she had brought home the most advanced aircraft in the American inventory. Emergency vehicles surrounded the bomber within seconds, their crews trained to handle everything from fuel leaks to unexploded ordnance. But as Cassandra shut down the engines and began her post-flight checklist, she realized that the real significance of her mission was just beginning to unfold. Her radio crackled with an encrypted transmission from Major Sullivan. "Spirit 2-1, Viper lead. Package delivered successfully. All threats are neutralized." The F-16 pilots had won their aerial battle, shooting down 3 of the 4 pursuing MiGs while the 4th fled toward Iranian airspace. But the cost had been significant. Captain Chun's fighter had taken damage from a missile that detonated close enough to pepper her aircraft with shrapnel. "Viper lead, Spirit 2-1. Outstanding work up there. Drinks are on me when you get back." "Copy that, Ghost. Save some bourbon for Phoenix. She's the one who got the double kill." As Cassandra completed her shutdown procedures, ground crews were already examining the damage to her bomber. The 30mm holes in her wing were just the beginning. Stress fractures ran along multiple structural elements, and her stealth coating had been compromised in dozens of locations. The aircraft would require months of repair work before it could fly again. Colonel Matthews, the wing commander, arrived at the aircraft just as Cassandra was climbing down from the cockpit. His expression was unreadable, but she could see both pride and concern in his eyes. "Captain Reynolds, I've been flying for 28 years, and I've never seen anything like what you did tonight. But I need to ask, was it worth it?" The question went to the heart of military decision-making. 8 American soldiers were alive because of her actions, but she had compromised the secrecy of the B-2 program and potentially given enemy intelligence agencies valuable insights into American capabilities. "Sir, I had 8 Americans under fire and enemy fighters strafing their positions." The decision made itself. Colonel Matthews nodded slowly. He had been in similar situations during his own combat career, and he understood the impossible choices that combat pilots sometimes faced. "The Pentagon is going to want a full debrief. There are people in Washington who aren't happy about the exposure of stealth capabilities. But there were other people who understood the true value of what had happened that night." Staff Sergeant Martinez and his 7 surviving soldiers were already being evacuated to medical facilities, their lives saved by a pilot who had chosen duty over protocol. As the sun rose over the Afghan mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Cassandra stood beside her damaged bomber and reflected on the night's events. She had engaged 10 enemy fighters single-handedly, using technology and tactics that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible in aerial warfare. More importantly, she had proven that the human spirit could still triumph over technological superiority, that courage and skill could overcome seemingly impossible odds. Her father would have been proud of the pilot she had become, but more proud of the person she had chosen to be when it mattered most. The damaged B-2 spirit would eventually be repaired and returned to service, its capabilities enhanced by lessons learned from this unprecedented engagement. But the real legacy of Operation Silent Thunder would be the knowledge that sometimes the most advanced technology in the world was only as good as the person operating it. As Cassandra walked toward the debriefing room, she carried with her the satisfaction of a mission accomplished against all odds. She had faced the ultimate test of a combat pilot and emerged victorious, bringing home both her aircraft and the knowledge that 8 American families would not be receiving folded flags. In the end, that was worth any risk, any compromise, any consequence that might follow. Some things were more important than secrecy, and the lives of fellow Americans topped that list every time. The war in Afghanistan would continue, but tonight, one small unit of soldiers would live to fight another day because a pilot named Cassandra Reynolds had decided that some battles were worth fighting, regardless of the odds. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.